involved in expelling the urine. It's called the Micturition reflex. It's controlled by the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest one. Basically, things that can wait if you're in an emergency, but when you have a chance, you want to deal with them. Although, sometimes these things can become emergencies, as evidenced by Garfield's bouncing there. So, a reflex can be looked at in the same way as a homeostatic mechanism, where you have a stimulus, you have receptors that detect it, you have a control center somewhere that's going to send signals to effectors. Here's the bladder and urethra. The stimulus is how much it's stretching. There are stretch receptors in the wall. These are sensory neurons. The control center is the spinal cord. And then the effectors is the detrusor muscle, or the mucus coat. And its response is to contract, and that squeezes the bladder and pushes the urine out. There are two sphincters, rings of muscle, around the urethra. One of them is part of the muscular coat, and that one's involuntary. The other one is in the pelvic floor. That's voluntary. It's called the external urethral sphincter. The way you get voluntary control of urination is that the spinal cord tells the brain about the stretch, and your brain sends messages back that inhibit the muscles of the bladder and strengthen the constriction of the external urethral sphincter. So potty training a little kid is a combination of the external urethral sphincter has to be strong enough, and those brain pathways have to have developed. So here it is mapped out as 1, 2, 3 are our receptors, control center, and the message out to the effectors. A and B are the side messages up to the brain to get the voluntary control.
Neural control of urination, Micturition reflex. When the bladder is full, stretch receptors in the wall of the bladder send nerve impulses to the sacral region of the spinal cord. By way of a parasympathetic response, signals return to the bladder and stimulate contraction of the muscle of the bladder and relaxation of the internal urethral sphincter. This part of the reflex is involuntary and is predominant in infants and young children. As the central nervous system matures, it requires voluntary control over the external urethral sphincter. Urination is controlled mainly by the Micturition center in the pons. This center receives sensory signals from the bladder and communicates with the cortex about the appropriateness of urinating at the moment. At times when it's not convenient to urinate, the center sends back an inhibitory signal to keep the sphincters closed and prevent voiding. When you wish to urinate, this inhibition is removed. The spinal cord instructs the muscle of the bladder to contract and the sphincters to open to let the urine out.
Questions on urination or the Micturition reflex? Okay. That's our chapter.